Hi, Nat.
Good morning, Mac.
Good morning. How are you?
I am overall well.
Excellent. Good, good, good.
How are you?
Uh, I'm good. Yeah, yeah. I had a nice walk with the dog and then got my cup of coffee, so it's a good morning.
Hmm.
Yeah. I think we both thought it would be nice to sit down and have another chat. And it's funny because, well, we had let's see, about a week ago, we had our first inquiry session with a number of people who are looking at the new program that's launching in October, our new cohort of the advanced diploma. And maybe I'll start, with one of the things that surprised me was that some of the people on the call were like, well, we've been listening to this
Yeah.
podcast. And something really, I was like, oh, this has meaning for people. And I think I told you, like, I definitely started to tear up. Like, I had like this emotional reaction of like, oh wow, like there's people out there who find this meaningful. And so I just wanted to maybe first acknowledge that I was like, wow, like I'm really happy to know that people find this useful. And um, yeah, so thank you for listening.
Yeah, I felt the same. I messaged you afterwards and people actually listen to our conversations. um so yeah, it's nice. It's nice to know that we can just have an honest, authentic conversation and it can be meaningful and insightful for other people. So
Yeah,
yeah, felt really nice.
yeah,
Yeah.
we did. Um, and I think it's what maybe led us to jump in and jump back in this week and maybe start to debrief a little bit of some of the things that we heard during that conversation,
Mm.
things that came up for you and for me, and we can go from there.
Yeah, and I think that the power of these conversations that you and I have are almost like a live sense making, right? It's our own, it's allowing others to kind of sit in and listen to us as we make sense of our work and our being and our doing. So what we wanted to do was take some of the threads or a thread that was quite pertinent for us from that conversation. We had about it was about 10 of us on the call, I think, roughly 9, 10. And there was so much that was shared and so many different threads. But one of them that kind of stuck out for both of us was this notion of it was Joanna actually who talked about the process that she was in of integrating a more cohesive, I can't remember her words, but integrating her being and doing more and more. So it was a thread that we wanted to pick up on because I think it's so relevant in the program and the work we do.
Yeah, and when you say all that, I think it's something that I've been wrestling with, and the question of maybe the words that are in my head are like, are we being coaches or are we doing coaching?
Mm,
I don't know. And is there a time and a place for both? And then reflexively, if you look at like the client, are we being there for them or are we helping them to do what they want to do? The
mm,
language is not perfect, but
mm,
because not helping them to do anything, right? But I mean, I think that the question is the outcome for them to do new things, and I think that's the way that I was trained was like, well, we need to finish each coaching session with a what are you going to do as a result of this conversation. And it's interesting as we have evolved our practice. I'm like, oh, that like matters a little bit less to me now.
yeah.
I'm really more concerned, like, how are you coming out of this session? So it's like an interesting way to think about the outcome questions that I've moved. Yeah, I'm sure many of us have moved in and out of.
Yeah. And I think we, as I hear you say that, perhaps what we are doing with developmental coaching is we are focusing more on their being. I had it here, my thought in my mind, and now it's like I can't grasp it. But it's when we end a session. I mean, I will often say something like, what are you taking away from our conversation today? What's resonating with you? Those kind of conversations. So there's an action point of what are you making sense of and what are they taking from the conversation. Like I kind of had this image of one of the slides we had, I think, on the other week on our in the module, we had an image of a person with a little like backpack on.
Ant. It was
Was
an
it an
ant.
ant?
Yeah.
Oh, an ant
It was
with
an ant
a
with a little stick with the little bag on the end, like a hobo. I don't know if
yeah.
that's politically correct.
And I kind of have that image of like them going off with something in their backpack or their little bag and a stick.
Mm.
But those things or that thing that they're walking away with might not be a doing action. It's just something that an insight or a word or something that's they're making sense of. And because I think with the developmental lens, we are focusing more on how are you showing up and how are you making sense of things? What is your being that then affects your doing? Whereas I guess more like conventional coaching or traditional coaching is more focused on the doing part.
And I would say, what if they take away nothing? Then has it been like a waste of time?
Well, it's an interesting question because it goes often. Client might say something like, I feel a lot calmer, or I feel some relief, or I don't feel any better, but I've got more clarity. Like, I guess there's always, and maybe I'm pointing more towards a feeling. I think if someone walks away from a coaching session with nothing, then what is the moment that we're creating?
So then are we valuing the feeling of calmness or relief as nothing?
No, but it goes back to this word intimacy keeps coming up. And actually, I'm thinking about a Substack article that Ian wrote. I read it this morning, so I think he wrote it yesterday. And he was talking about love in coaching and love for the presence of love in a human to human interaction. So I think it goes back to, I think it's a really good question because I think it forces you to think about what are you doing, who are you being with coaching, what are you bringing. So I guess it goes back to that your original question of are we being a coach or are we doing coaching, or both?
Or both? Yeah. And it's interesting because so I dropped my son off today at school, and he was like really late finishing his breakfast. I mean, like breakfast was in the car, and then by the time we got to school, he still wasn't done. I was like, okay, well, we just like sit and like it's pre-kindergarten, so it's not like we need to be at the desk at at some certain amount of time. So I was like, okay, well, let's just sit in the patio, and you can finish your breakfast. And so yeah, so I sat down in a chair, and he jumped on my lap, and he basically just ate his breakfast, and I think that's kind of all he wanted to do. Like we didn't really talk, we just sat there, and then he finished, and then I was like, okay, well, gonna get ready to go, and there's a little bit of kerfuffle, and then he's like, okay, bye, and then he just sort of walked off, right? And it continues to go back to this like parenting advice that I got early on, is that kids don't need you to do things with them; they just need to be beed with.
Mm.
And he just wanted to be with me. He just wanted to sit with me and eat his breakfast and feel connected.
Mm-hmm.
Go off and do his day. You know what I mean? And I think, the more I sit with this and, we're like listening to Ian, who's on the Quaker love train, I'm like, yeah, I really I get that. It's making more sense to me about the power of just connecting with another human being and then being with them, in this non-judgmental, abiding presence. I think those are the words we've shared. And so then, yeah, like, is that, some of the essence of what we're doing, especially if we're not moving towards performance. We're just being like, hey, come and bring whatever you have today, and I will sit with you with it. You don't have to go through this alone.
I think, yeah, and I think where people get the sticking point is that it feels like this notion of being and connection and almost not doing anything we know is valuable in itself. And I think there is perhaps what our job as coaches, not perhaps, I think our job as coaches that do get paid to be with others, is to work on with, grow, be aware of our own interior, so that
Yes.
we can, so the quality of our being that we're bringing to others is, there's this notion of holding space, which gets a bit of a bad rap, holding space.
Yes.
But essentially, it's being able to be present with another without having to kind of insert our own sense making or projections or triggers. There's this notion of containment that's talked about. That containment can mean a few different things. For me, it means like, how do you set up the container? How do you, in the diploma, we call it be the steward of the contract? How do we create a space where connection, being, sense making can happen? But there's also this notion in an embodiment of containment, being able to hold what someone else is bringing and still be centered in ourselves, and not being objective or stoic, but not being able to feel and see what's going on inside ourselves and be with that and not react to it, as well as what the other person is bringing.
Yeah, that resonates a lot. And it's funny when we're talking about this, like this whole idea of connection continues to surface up. Like, well, what does it mean? Like, how do we like look at the quality of connection? Like, two things are in my head. Maybe I'll just start with the first one. It's interesting. When I was on my break, I talked to an old friend who I hadn't seen in like 10 years. Yeah, 10 years maybe. And he and I used to be like really close. I mean, talk about all the things, spirituality, drugs, just sort of like the range of the world. Had a lot of just like amazing, just fun experiences together. But we haven't really like been together for, and been in each other's presence for a long time. And we got a chance to catch up over the phone. And it was funny because like the first 5 to 7 minutes of the conversation were so clunky. Hey, how are you doing? Like, and just trying to like find a way to like connect. And I was sort of like, oh, like our need and our ability to do a little bit of small talk is the attuning process, right, to somebody else and where they are, right? And like, if you haven't seen them for a long time, then you probably need to spend more time attuning. Or or if like, I saw you a couple days ago, right? So I'm just like, oh, like we can just sort of like, bzz, and then we can start to like work and like look at our connection, right? And build a connection. And I thought, like how many people do you know who are like, oh, I just hate small talk. I just want to get into the deep stuff. I'm like, oh, interesting. But then how do you get to the deep stuff if you don't attune? So, what that brings me to is I think part of what we are maybe learning, what we are good at, the thing that we can't really describe is we're probably, as coaches, like very good at connecting with other people. And the more comfort you have with yourself, the deeper the connection can be with somebody else because you've worked on it yourself, right? You're willing to ask that question that like
Yes.
most people won't ask because they don't have the safety enough to ask that question, like the safety within themselves to have to ask that question.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting, like, trying to figure out, okay, like how clean do I feel? How much work have I done so that I feel clear enough to be here with you? And like, if it, goes down a windy path, I'm not getting sucked in by my own stuff.
Yes.
So that I go down the hole with you, I can actually stay over here and be like, okay, like I see that. And I can sit here with you in it.
Mm.
And that, we sort of talk about, it moves us away from, let's look at your problem to be, I'm here with you in it. And I'm not being pulled into it like you are. Like I'm a steady presence while you're going through the storm and we can just stand here together.
There's so much there that's coming up for me. One is this notion of attunement, I think is really important, and our ability to be aware of how we attune to others, because like I have one embodiment teacher that talks about we're just like walking nervous systems, and we're just constantly reacting to each other's nervous systems, and either, it's a good, bad, or it's a, safe, not safe. It's a constant reaction to our external stimuli and other people. And so our ability to be aware of attunement as we work with others, and attunement is being aware of another and how we connect and how we settle and how we create safety, and containment. But it's not like I'm going to climb in with you and let's look at this together. It's like it's being able to stay in right relation to the other person. And there's something else that you said. Yeah, it was, we talk about self-experiencing in the program, and how part of what we're doing in the program is developing our capacity for self-experiencing, so noticing what's going on in self as we're with another, which I think is what you were speaking to then, and noticing when. And I'd be interested in hearing what your thoughts, because you said before that you don't have an inner dialogue. So when I'm coaching, I'm noticing a lot about what's going on for me, like sensations, thoughts, memories, even. And I'm noticing that as I'm with another, and, noticing what's useful, what's not useful. So I wonder, and in my noticing, I'm able to understand what is mine and what might be useful to share. And that's come over practice, and over time. But I'm interested in what's happening for you.
I think the way that I would describe it is I'm like, I was sitting here listening to you, and I'm just with you in your thought process. And then I was like, oh, I don't know, maybe like I saw something, and if I get distracted for a minute or a second, then I lose my, like, the connection breaks, and then I'm like, and then I need to come back. But there's no like chitter chatter, especially if you're just speaking. But usually there will be a question. I'm like, that's interesting. Like there's just like a thread that comes through, right? That's where, kind of this, like, everything that we've talked about. I'm like, there's usually just been one, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And then I'll continue listening, and I'm like, I'll just hold that one thing. And then I just decide whether or not it's worthwhile to raise it or not to raise it. But I generally don't have to like fight off the, sort of the voices. It's usually like a pretty clear, like, oh, that's interesting. And then it comes through. So I find I don't have to usually push myself out of the conversation because I feel like I'm in it. Now, what did come up for me was that, so this is why it's really hard to like coach your partner, because you're like in it with them, or even just like, a normal friendship, right? You're like, because I'm invested in this piece. And so I have a little voice that does care. And it's like, well, what about my needs? And I'm like, so I can't be so clear. I can't be so clean in my thinking and in my presence, because I have this bias of like, but I don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
And so then it's hard to distinguish the voices at that level, to be like, am I saying this for me, or am I saying this on your?
Yes. And I think you raise a really good point, is that it's about your need. So if there is a need in us with a client, then that we're not able to be aware of or have previously explored on our own, then that need is going to be projected in some way to the client, right? I need you to make me feel like I'm, like, if it's our expert, I need you for me to feel like I'm knowledgeable or powerful or needed, or all of these things. I think that's a really important point of why our own being is really important, because if we have needs that are unresolved in any areas of our life, that potentially can be leaking out, shall we say, in our coaching and with our clients.
And I think it jumps us back to this question of like, well, then when I ask, what are you taking away from this session? Am I asking it for you, or am I asking it for me?
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
I think earlier, like, I used to be like, yeah, what are you going to do? And they know what they need to do.
Exactly.
But I kind of want to just hear it. And I used to say, well, I'm asking it on your behalf so you can tell me clearly, so you can hear yourself say it. So I've definitely used that like rationalization. I think, I would say maybe even in the last year, I've moved less into that because I can see where they've gotten to in their thinking. And they're like, oh, yeah, I'm very clear. So then for me to ask it again it starts to feel repetitive because I'm like, could you say it one more time?
Well, it also feels like it's not trusting them as
Yes.
capable adults to take what they need and do what they need to do.
Right.
It feels very almost like I can never say this word, infantilizing
Yeah.
of the client, right? And so this is another thing I think that informs a mature practice is a very adult to adult relationship. And again, I think that can be an unrequited need that comes up to be the parent, or to be the knowledgeable one, the expert, or to be the guide. We've talked about that before as well. So all of these needs, and it's a really good about this doing and being, because I think as a coach you have to start learning the doing, and then you can almost put the tools aside, and your being becomes more important, I think. I don't know if that's a statement I want to stick by, but I'm just
Yeah.
thinking about when I first started coaching. I remember I would be thinking, right, what am I going to ask next? What's going to be a powerful question to ask? And I even used to have this Rolodex of questions. I could never use it because I'm not going to get my Rolodex out and go, okay.
1 second.
Yes, 1 second. But I was very conscious about my doing. But I kind of needed to move through that in order to, get to a point where I could soften the doing.
Right. Well, is it softening? Like, I still think the practice of asking these questions, right? Being able to do the skill of listening
Yeah.
and then finding the question that might help them move themselves along is still really like, we still need to do that, right? I don't think the weight or the pressure of doing that work, right, is lessened. Because that's still, like part of me, you holding space for the person, right? If they're like, I just went through this really tough time, and you're like, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's active. It's active
Is
being.
that? Yeah,
Yeah.
right, exactly, right. It's not the like I'm fumbling through the music still. It's like, oh yeah,
No.
I know how to play the music, and now I'm just gonna like keep playing the music. But I'm gonna like start thinking about like, how do I want to improvise? Like, what do I want to do over here? But I know the song,
Mm.
pretty well,
Mm.
right? I played the song 2,000 hours, right? So I'm like, well,
Yeah.
I've listened to this music, right? And I know all the lyrics, and I don't have to think about it anymore, you know. So it's almost moving out of that thinking into like being, right? Like this is just who I am.
Yeah.
My authentic self is like able to sit and ask the questions, and then we can be more like, okay, now I can actually like attune to you and work on my attunement and my connection. And I'm like,
Mm.
oh, like yeah, like that's a lot that's coming up for you. But it's interesting because we
Yeah.
don't teach a lot of the inner condition work. We don't teach a lot of that early on, which is I think is really interesting, right? In the coaching, like you have to get to later stages to start thinking about like how am I showing up for the client, or at least in my school, I don't feel like we learn that very much.
No. I mean, yeah, not to the depth that we do now. But I think, yeah, it's again, it's not it's a is so much more complex than a binary being doing, because we are also there's something coming up for me about receptivity. We're being in a receptive space as a client, listening, feeling, responding, but then also we need to know when we do need to, or when it might be useful to be more challenging or ask a question that, what does Simon Weston call it? Takes things awry.
Yeah.
To kind of just look at something from a very different perspective. So it's knowing, which state you're in and what's useful and what's not. I feel like this is like a really huge topic.
I know, I'm like so broad.
Yeah, that we could talk about.
Yeah.
At length. How is I'm conscious we're at half an hour.
Yeah.
How's your being?
How's my being? I really I'm very energized by this conversation. It's very, I think it gets to the core of what we're doing, and how we're doing it. And, I think, and it makes me feel very grounded in, okay, well, I'm going to come in and show up for my clients in this way. But other side of my brain is like, well, how do you make money doing it? How do we continue to make money doing it? When I think the world around us, the highly capitalistic world around us does not really place a value on this ability to hold human connections and to create and facilitate human connections. I think at the senior-most leadership levels, they do. They can see it, right? Because they brought in people and they're like, this person seems good at what they do. This person does not seem as good at what they do. For some reason, the team coalesced when we brought this person in. When we brought that person in, it was not good, right? So it's interesting because at the highest levels, we see that being able to be quantified. Okay, we'll pay your rate. But sort of at the lower levels where we're, out in the world, it's a little bit more dicey, and I think, maybe the last place my mind goes is really we're being taught to connect to these phones. And I was on vacation and just watching hordes of people sitting at a beautiful swimming pool, and they're just like this. Their partner is right next to them doing the same thing. Kids on iPads everywhere, just, and it was so illuminating. Just we're connected to these devices, right? In place of the connection for humanity. And we're essentially setting the model that this is more, whatever's inside the box, soothe us to the same way that a human connection can. And I think that's, we get a little bit back into the AI conversation, right? Because this doesn't yell at us.
Yeah.
It gives us dopamine and it doesn't yell at us. There's no volatility, right? You deal with your kids, you're like, oh man, my kid's going bonkers.
Yeah. And so I'm stressed messier. Already. Yeah.
It's messier.
And I think there's real value in being more aware of our being, no matter what job we do, what level we are, because the more we can be aware of our being and our interior condition, the less we are either numbing out or reacting to external stimuli and being in this constant state of stress. So I think it has real value. And one thing, there's a few things I think we can continue the conversation next time. One is that I ran a session for quite a junior team last week about feedback and having courageous conversations, which is something I'm still practicing. Definitely don't declare myself an expert in that. But one of the kind of things that was coming up was this notion of efficiency over relationship and how we are forfeiting relationship for the sake of efficiency and what impact that is having. And I think that's something that we could continue to speak about because I think it comes back to this.
Yes.
And I also have some thoughts about being at more junior levels and what that looks like from a developmental perspective. But maybe we can talk about that next time.
Yes. That sounds amazing. So I think to finish this off and to maybe make a plug. If you want to join us, we'll be having another inquiry session on May 20th, Tuesday, May 20th at 4:30 p.m. Hong Kong time. If you're interested, I'll put a link into the YouTube, and you can sign up for that and join us. And yeah, just come in and talk about being coaches in the world we live in. Being coaches in the world we live in. And otherwise, anything else?
No, just that if any of what we've talked about today piques your interest, get in contact with us. We love to chat, as you can see. And we've got the second cohort of our second in Asia, probably 10th or something in the UK, starting at the end of this year. You can join us for that too.
Beautiful. All right.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Nat. See you later.
See ya.